Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third and final event in this year's Champinafu webinar series titled Indigenous Placekeeping in Corvallis and at the Confluence. As always, we are thrilled you're here with us tonight. My name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a public services librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. I'd just like to take a quick second to orient you to the platform we are using today. To submit questions throughout this evening's presentations, which we will answer at the end of the event, please click on Q&A, which is usually in the top left corner of your window. Also, please note that we will send a video recording of today's event via email to everyone who registered, whether they attend or not, within approximately 24 to 48 hours. The first in the 2022 Champinafu series, Shawala, Birthplace of William Hartless, has been subtitled and posted to the library's YouTube channel. And I'm going to share the link to that in the chat with you right about now. There we are. Enjoy that. You can also just find it on the library's YouTube page if you don't happen to get the link. Unfortunately, we're not quite finished subtitling the second Champinafu lecture, which was titled The Kalapuya Seasonal Round at the Confluence. So it's not on the library's YouTube channel just yet, but I'm going to go ahead and share here the uncaptioned version in case you just cannot wait to see it. So here comes that to you right now. I hope you enjoy. We will have it on the library's YouTube channel pretty soon. The library is so honored to be one of the co-sponsors of this event series. And to help us kick off tonight's event, I would first like to introduce Dave Eckert, who did a lot of the work to organize this series and bring us all here today. Dave's going to tell us more about the theme of the Champinafu series, as well as about our co-sponsors. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Bonnie. And let me bring up the slide and share. And whoops, let me start from the beginning. Well, I didn't do that right. Let me stop sharing just for a second, sorry. Stop share. Sorry, I forgot to put it in the right place. Okay. And share. There we go. I've only done that 100 times. And, so I have the wrong screen, but anyway, there we go. Okay. So for those of you who are here for the first time, Champinafu is the area around Corvallis and Philomath, and that's the name in Kalapuya, where the Ampinafu band has lived for thousands of years. And our sponsors tonight are the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, which selects the themes, the webinar subjects, and the presenters. So whatever you see is a presentation really by the Grand Ronde. And the initial co-sponsor was the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club, still is, in a primary funder of the program. And that's who I'm representing tonight. And the Spring Creek Project from Oregon State University is also one of the original co-sponsors and a primary funder of it. The Corvallis Sustainability Coalition has come on in the last couple of years as a co-sponsor, and then the Benton County Public Library came on, as you just heard from Bonnie, as a co-sponsor and our technical host and the moderator for the evening. So thank you to all. And as Bonnie said, we've had 3 this year, 3 webinars, and you can see the titles there. The first one, she already gave you the YouTube connection, was Shalawa, which is Kalapuya word for where the shawal is for a flower, but also has become a place in Corvallis, named after a person who is in the photo right here, was named Shawala. And the presenter of that was Jed Schrock from the Grand Ronde. And the second one was about the Kalapuya round, was the about Kalapuya places of residence through the seasonal cycle. And the presenter was from OSU, Dr. David Lewis of the Grand Ronde. And I'd like to introduce tonight my friend David Harrelson, who was right there at the very beginning and thought this was a good idea to do back in 2016. And he's been leading the charge ever since. And we're so grateful that David has brought his heritage into the limelight in what is now current day Corvallis. So David, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Dave and Bonnie and all of our sponsors. It's great to be with all of you. Thank you for joining us. When Dave and I sat down this year to talk about presentations, really the one thing that resonated through with me was, there's been all these really great art projects that have been going on in the city of Corvallis. And I wanted to be able to make sure that one of these programs talked about that and shared some of what has happened, some things that are on the way. And then in the spirit of all that happening, a group of our artists from the tribe and the neighboring Siletz tribe got, I guess, booked to do a show that opens this Friday, which you'll get to hear more about. So that was really exciting and timely. And so I was able to invite people that have been doing work connected to the Corvallis area, as well as the folks that are going to be in that show that you'll be able to see in Corvallis. So that's a little bit about what we have. I'm going to do a little bit of conversation about placekeeping and kind of context. I linked in the chat, and I'll link it a couple more times throughout the presentation today, a PDF document that includes like some links to the shows that are referenced throughout the talk, some key terminology, some follow-up articles and sources if you're interested in the themes and the topics of art and placekeeping. So thank you for being with us. We're going to do rolling introductions sort of as we get to sections of our individual speakers and panelists. So our format today, I'll open up and do about 5-10 minutes of presenting, and then I'll pass it off to Anthony Hudson, and then Steph Littlebird Fogel, and then Matthew Earl Williams. And then after we have presentations from everybody, we will move into a kind of roundtable where I ask questions of our panelists. And after that, if we still have time, we will be open for some questions from the audience. We anticipate this not going any longer than an hour and a half. So 8:30 is our stop time, but it could wrap up a little bit early. With that, I will share my PowerPoint. So, Indigenous placekeeping in Corvallis. What is Indigenous placekeeping? This is what it is. It's art by Indigenous people. Is one of the most, This is a quote that I'm going to get to the term, it's the second slide, but this I wanted to put, it's an excerpt from our Indigenous Placekeeping Artist Fellowship. And essentially what it's drawing attention to is the power of art to hold place in our homelands. And many of you have attended previous talks where we've talked about removal and the history of Indigenous people, or biological communities, or all the aspects of the knowledge of the last 6 years of doing these presentations. A lot of that is very applicable to placekeeping. But in this particular talk today, we're really going to talk about art. And this is this idea that art by Indigenous people is one of the most effective and recognizable ways that we as Indigenous people of place can hold a place in our homelands and further our own recognition and persistence. The term placekeeping is the active care and maintenance of a place and its social fabric by the people who live and work in a place in a manner that prioritizes ecological, historical, and cultural relationships to place while bringing the presence of Indigenous histories and futures into focus. I really see Indigenous placekeeping as a unifying element. It's not something that is just available to contribution by Native people, although I think the Indigenous people of place, like my ancestors and our tribe today, need to really be at the forefront and a part of those efforts. Placekeeping is something that any group can do. It's just Indigenous placekeeping is that particular focus on tribal related Indigenous histories and the idea of Indigenous futures or futurisms. So what has this looked like? I've told you that placekeeping work around arts has been happening in Corvallis, but what does it look like? Well, probably one of the most notable is this art installation that was just recently opened within the last month. There was the formal opening event at Oregon State University. The new forestry building has these wood sculptures of power figures, as well as an outdoor installation. And I include the words here because these words are written on basket-like features that we'll look at pictures of later. But one of the things that you're seeing here is that is really cool. It's as the forestry science building. They're using a different type of wood. So each one of the power figures is a different type of wood from Oregon. And then the figures themselves are indicative of the Columbia River or Chinookan art form, which is an Indigenous art form from this region. So instead of totem pole art, like you've heard me talk about, or Travis Stewart in the past, form line art or totem pole art is from further north up the coast. But here down in the northern Willamette Valley and the lower Columbia River, we have an art form known as Chinookan art. And you see some of the examples of that form here, like tri-platform faces. You see motifs like the triangle motif pattern. You see chevron-like shapes, circles inside of circles, etc. So this whole installation is inspired off the Kalapuya flood story. And I've shared that story as part of previous webinars. But this is a summary of the artist's statement that's written outside. I'm telling a story. Long ago, the people would tell this story. The water rose up, all the land went underwater, all the people ran away and climbed up the big mountain, Mary's Peak. Then they thought, what should we do now? Then they built fire. They had a lot of food again. So here's some more images of this latest art installation. And this was done by a group of tribal artists known as the Wakanim Associates that includes Travis Stewart, Sherrod Yonker, Earl Davis, and Tony Johnson were the artists that contributed to these pieces. And outside, so there's sort of landscape elements, and they look like these metal, almost like half baskets that are buried in the flood deposits is sort of the installation. And this was paid for through a percent for the arts funding for the construction of the building. So this is something that's very active in community. There's an outdoor element up, but it is a very publicly accessible space here in the community of Corvallis, and I encourage you to go check it out. I think that in some of the ways what it does for placekeeping is it shows all the different woods and by proxy what their cultural value. Like there's many different wood types that had different purposes, and the ability to like talk about those with the individual power figures. But also just this idea that there's physical art that is representing and evoking and speaking to the floods that happened here in the Willamette Valley. So this next example is a preview, and it's a preview because I can share that something that was really exciting in the last year that I've been able to participate in is Oregon Department of Transportation reached out through a contractor who's been working on design elements for the new Oregon 34 bridge in the town of Corvallis. And they asked, hey, how is it that we can incorporate Indigenous knowledge or knowing or art into this project? And an idea came up, two different aspects to that idea, and I won't steal the thunder if our other panelist, Steph Fogel, wants to talk about how she was commissioned as an artist to provide some artistic work for the bridge. But something that I assisted with was helping designers understand association of cultural plants and different material objects of our ancestors. So these are pictures of Wapato on the top, and these are spoon canoes on the bottom. And spoon canoes were used to gather Wapato, which is this tuber that grows in wetland marsh areas. People would hang off the sides of the canoe, dig up the Wapato bulbs with their feet, and then they would float to the top and they'd pick them up and put them in the canoe. And so this inspiration has resulted in these designs that are under revision still. These are drafts, but if performed, it could look something like this, where you have a panel along these architectural elements to the bridge, and in concrete inlay, you would have images of Wapato and spoon canoes with paddles, right? And I get so excited about this because with all the back channels and everything that used to exist before the channelization of the river, Wapato was a really big thing, even in the Willamette system. In fact, there's still many areas on the Willamette where you can harvest Wapato. And so I got really excited about that because it's something that is a part of everyday construction that somebody walking along the bridge could just look at it and it's beautiful, but it also tells a story of place. And it speaks to indigenous placekeeping. A few other examples, camas, probably if you've heard any of my talks before, I typically talk about camas, a very important traditional food. You eat the bulbs, but generally people most recognize camas when it blooms in June, May, June of each year with these beautiful blue flowers. And down below here, you see an image of a cuppin or a digging stick. And these digging sticks were what was used to dig up traditionally, and still today, people use them to dig the camas bulbs. And so here's a motif that's an artistic element of the idea of camas, and then a digging stick down below with some bulbs. And nettle would be the next. So nettle, many know as stinging nettle, and they often want to avoid it at all costs. But in addition to being able to eat it, if you prepare it properly, getting all those spiny things that sting you off of it, it makes one of the strongest cordages that we have available. You see that image down in the lower left-hand corner, a really important thing for making rope, to twine, to tying many things up, a very traditionally important part of life. And so the artist did this rendering for like a concrete frieze that kind of artistically shows the idea of stinging nettle and then cordage down below. So these are just a couple examples of, both very much art project and then infrastructure, and the ways that in Corvallis we might be able to take indigenous teachings that we've talked about many different times, or that people like, Merle Holmes and other that have done work in the community of Corvallis, as well as Judy Junton and so many other volunteers and interested parties, we can find ways to represent them in everyday infrastructure. So hopefully in the coming years, this will come to fruition as a part of the bridge project. And it could be even more than these 3 examples. It could be as many as 10 or maybe even 30 different associative images that actually end up as a part of that bridge project. So it's still very much a project in process, but exciting to kind of share this idea of placekeeping, and very much applicable to that area so close to the mouth of the Marys River. So with that, those are kind of the 2 examples that I wanted to share with you today. And I'm going to invite Anthony Hudson, Carla Rossi to join us on screen. So Anthony, and I'll actually explain IPCA too. So Anthony Hudson is the 2022 Indigenous Placekeeping Artist Fellow for the Grand Round Tribes. Anthony has a performance name known as Carla Rossi. Carla Rossi is Portland's premier drag clown, and Anthony is a Grand Round tribal member, although is also very closely connected to the Siletz tribe. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Anthony over these last few years. It's been a real honor, and learning about their work and what they're doing, and engaging ideas of Indigenous identity with just the ridiculousness of the world, and sharing that with people in a way that makes people smile and think deeply. And if you've ever checked out Anthony Hudson's book stacks, Anthony is a very well-read person who shares pictures of all this amazing reading. And in addition to being a jokester and a trickster, is an all-around great deep thinking person. And meet Anthony.
Well, thank you so much, David. Nowadays, I mostly just read manga, which is gay Japanese comics. So hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Hudson, and thank you again, David. I full disclosure, I'm getting over a rather nasty cold. So if I start talking about like aliens or Cher, rest assured that actually that's normal. Let's see here. So I'm an artist and a writer. I've been performing as Carla Rossi, Portland's premier drag clown, since 2010. Carla is my way of literally painting myself white and becoming a horrible trickster demon. She is the ghost of white privilege, and as she would say, that's hilarious because it will never die. She lives in a castle in Lake Oswego, and my idea with Carla is I'm less interested in drag that's like female impersonation. I'm interested in the idea of drag that just obliterates gender and obliterates all of these things that we have come to take as granted, as you know, when it comes to how we interface with the world. So thinking about Carla and how I use her to point a mirror back at Portland, at my home city that I live in here, because I like to enact sort of the dramas of what I see ill in the world through Carla. I put it on and I point it back at people, like a horrible white-faced clown mirror. So getting to do this work, getting to do, I should also say that coming off of this, I actually spent several years touring a show called Looking for Tiger Lily, which is all about my identity of being a mixed person, being a Native person, being a queer person, doing drag. And thanks to IPCA's support through Grand Round, I am now adapting that show into a book and researching instances of Indigenous queerness in Western Oregon, and interviewing other Two-Spirit people as well. So talking about work in Corvallis, it's so funny that I get to do work in Corvallis because I have a soft spot for Corvallis. I spent like a year hanging out there after high school, going to Local Boys and eating Hawaiian food every single day. And now I get to hang out there a lot this month. I just did a show called Gloop, which is what you're seeing images from. Gloop is a show that I perform with my best friend and longtime collaborator, Pepper. We've been collaborating for 11 years together. And Gloop is a show, this is from a production at Portland Center Stage. We just mounted this at the Whiteside Theater in Corvallis on November 19th, a couple Saturdays ago. And Gloop is a show where Pepper and I, as you can see here, we enter into an apocalyptic space. It's just destroyed. And we are two white wellness influencers who want to help spread the word of the powers of intention and of wellness and of wholeness through this cutting edge tech and modalities that they have constructed that you can access for 7,000 payments of $900.99. And ultimately, this show is a giant send up of influencer culture, of whiteness, of wellness culture, of Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, really. That's why it's called Gloop. But the whole conceit with our show, it's kind of a psychedelic drag show gone wrong. The whole conceit is that our characters actually microdosing is one of their technologies that they use to better themselves in the world. And they actually microdosed a little too much right before they went on stage. So the show becomes just a psychedelic meltdown. And in the process, we get in fights about vaccines, and we do a land acknowledgement with a bullhorn while I sit on Pepper. And Carla proceeds to do a land acknowledgement that she absolutely fails to get right. She names every single tribe wrong. She can't pronounce the tribal names. I'm Kalapuya, among many other tribes that I'm descended from. Carla calls that tilapia. She doesn't know what's happening. So that's Gloop. And this is a sequence where I eat Cheetos on an inflatable airbed after the world has ended. Thanks, David, for going through these slides. Can you cross over to the next slide? This is something, so this is a show that we're talking about throughout the evening tonight. This is a piece from an exhibit from a big gallery show at the Corvallis Art Center called Always Here. And it's a awesome collaborative kind of collective group art show. It's not really a show of individual works. I mean, we have individual pieces in it, but it's really a group show that we've all kind of constructed with intention together. And there's collaborative works in the piece as well that were all wonderfully installed by Matthew Williams, who you'll hear from tonight, and other people at the art center down there. But this is a piece that's unlike anything I've ever done. I make video work in addition to my writing and in addition to my performance work. But this piece is called When She Was Hers, parentheses, Ona Beach, and it's about my relationship with my grandmother. Most of my work is always through Carla, or in my writing, it's autobiographical. And this work is really a little bit of autobiography, but it's really just me telling a story about my grandma. I wanted to share a story about her. My grandma was Gladys Bolton. She was a Slet's tribal member. She was a tribal judge, and she was the whip woman at our powwows for like 15 years. And in this video, I go back to the childhood beach that I spent with her at Seal Rock, Ona Beach at Seal Rock in Seal Rock, Oregon, which was about a 30-minute drive from Silet's, and I would spend my summers with her out there. And that's really where I really began to understand and connect with what it means to be Native, was through her and spending all this time with her. So this piece is me walking the beach, and there's captions that it's kind of like a visual poem, a video poem. And it's me trying to access and remember and return to this site of my youth that I'll never be able to return to again. But for me, it also kind of spoke to the idea of land back, and the idea of how built in and ingrained our bodies and our souls and our minds, our blood, how ingrained we are with the land. And for me, it's like, there's both a tribal connection to this land that she's on, that I went and visited her on, but there's also a direct connection to her, and she is no longer with us, and her house is still there, but it's not her house anymore. And this is her beach in my mind, but it's not hers anymore. And so, but it always will be. And so it's my way, a kind of personal way of talking about these much larger issues within land and territory and land back. And it's just kind of thoughtful and sad, but I had to get it out. Like in Beetlejuice, Delia Deetz says, if you don't let me express myself, I'll go insane and take you with me. So instead of therapy, I just make art. Thank you, David, for going through these slides. Let's go to the next one. And then I had to do something for Always Here that was much more in my oeuvre to be the art school jerk that uses that word. And so this is from a piece called, what is it called? This is from a piece called Martyr, or Your Own Prairie Bonnet Jesus. I thought it would be hilarious because the Art Center is an old church. It's like a million-year-old church. And I thought that it would be hilarious to place Carla, because she's a jerk and a clown. I thought it would be hilarious to put her on a cross at the far back center of the church, where the altar and where the cross would typically be. But I thought, why would I put a clown on a cross? I had this prairie bonnet costume. Well, I mean, the bonnet's a part of it. I always call it a prairie bonnet. But I had this prairie settler woman costume that I saw on Amazon that I had to buy. And I knew Carla had to wear it. And I got to perform in it in a performance at the Nordic Museum, where Carla was an arts administrator who interviews two Native artists that I was collaborating with, Rue George Warren and Akalu. And as they talk more about their traditions and their culture and their artwork, Carla becomes very insecure and white fragility ensues. And she leaves, she comes back on stage in the prairie woman outfit, and she screams at the audience, screams at the artist, and then ultimately they kill her, as one does. And I just was really still feeling this prairie woman vibe of what happens when this piece is really about white fragility. What happens when there's kind of a cultural jealousy? What happens when that intermeshes with fragility? And so this piece I thought, okay, it would be really funny because I wonder if anybody was offended that I was wearing this prairie settler woman costume and talking about my Viking ancestors that I don't have at the Nordic Museum. And then I thought, well, my culture is not a costume. And to me, I thought it would be hilarious to have a white person say my culture is not a costume because the people that dress up as other cultures are white people. But then this got me thinking about the idea of a martyr in general. So the next slide here, my ancestors were persecuted too. This video is about a 3-minute loop of Carla on the cross with an animated background, and she blinks, and then you see captions that fade in and out of different phrases. And so she says things like, my ancestors were persecuted too. You're not the only one who lost your land. What do you mean, you white people? And honestly, this is kind of, so I grew up in a mixed race household, and I never said this, even though this is going on a webinar. Oh my God, why am I doing this? But this was kind of inspired by hearing my parents fight when I was a kid. Because my dad is a very proud, tribal member, and he was a social worker for the tribe and a member of the American Indian movement, the radicals from the 70s. He was in them in the 70s. And my mom's German and Catholic, and whenever my parents would get into a fight, it would always reach the point where he would say, you white people. And then she would say, what do you mean, you white people? We were chased off of our land. And that kind of back and forth never got away from me. So I thought it would be hilarious to kind of put some of that fragility onto Carla and to have her on a cross as an actual martyr. Is it offensive? I don't know, probably, but I also think that religion is offensive. So I had to make that. So thank you so much for listening to me. That's my spiel today.
Thank you, Anthony. And for all of our attendees, I just want to echo this idea of we're talking about Indigenous placekeeping. And I think that the work that Anthony is doing is something that, we'll get to talk about when we have our question and answer, but it's keeping room for these narratives, right, that repeat themselves, that have gone on all throughout all time, from deep story times and economy, as we say, our creation stories, all the way to the present. And what I get so inspired about Anthony's work is that I feel like Anthony is keeping that other lens and that way of looking at things alive and translating it into these modern mediums, both with technology as well as, we have a deep, long history of two-spirit and tricksters and these ideas. And so I think that some people would be like, well, how is this Indigenous placekeeping? What are you keeping? It's like, well, those are all very alive things that, have been maybe repressed a lot more in the last 100 years than they were in the 100 years prior to that. And I just want to draw that as a connection to our topic. And thank you, Anthony. And I want to introduce Stephanie Fogel, who has joined us. I think many of you in Corvallis have probably seen these signs around OSU campus or other places. I really feel like this imagery has sort of taken the Willamette Valley by storm, if you will. If you haven't seen it, you're going to get to learn all about it from Steph herself. Steph, could you join us on screen?
Yeah, can you see me now?
Perfect. Yeah, I can see you. Awesome. Stephanie Little Bird Fogel is a Grand Round tribal member, also a graduate of PNCA, where she got to overlap a little bit with Anthony Hudson. We're really grateful. I've also gotten to know Stephanie in the last few years when she showed up on the scene as a guest curator, curating this show that she's going to talk with you about. Steph is a technical writer, is a graphic designer, an illustrator, has a great Instagram handle, Art Nerd Forever, of a lot of her work, and some of the coolest stickers of Indian country stickers that I've ever really come across. Is just a few things to say about Stephanie, but I will turn it over to you, Steph. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and then about this exhibit, This is Kalapuyan Land?
Yeah, thanks, David. I never knew that I was going to make money selling stickers, but that's what's happened. Is I'm a I'm a sticker salesman now. So aside from that, as David mentioned, my name is Steph Littlebird, and I am a member of the Grand Ronde Confederated Tribes. I'm specifically Kalapuyan and Chinook. And I curated, this was my very first exhibition that I ever curated, but I curated the exhibition, This is Kalapuyan Land, for Five Oaks Museum, which is formerly was actually known as the Washington County Museum, and has rebranded since this exhibition opened to the Five Oaks Museum. It's located actually on the PCC Rock Creek campus in Portland, Beaverton area there. But it's an awesome museum that is trying to sort of change its history. It originally started as a pioneer museum. They have a whole ass covered wagon in their archives in the museum. So very much celebrating that Oregon Trail history. But what was funny is that before they rebranded, they realized that their most popular exhibition was an exhibition called This Kalapuyan Land. And it was created about our tribe without any sort of collaboration with the tribe. The museum just sort of made it without asking. And so that was done 15 years prior to me coming to the museum. And basically what they did is they asked me to come and look at this exhibition and see, like, should we just put it in the dumpster, or is it worth, is it worth salvaging? And so what I did is I went through as a writer, as an editor, and I actually wrote all over their exhibition with Sharpies and and edited it with in collaboration actually with Dr. David Lewis, who was on a previous talk for this series. And so me and David Lewis collaborated to correct a lot of the errors in the exhibition. And so it originally started as a very straightforward gallery experience, history mixed with contemporary Indigenous arts, and telling the real story of the land that the Willamette Valley is, and the people that live there, and particularly in that area, which my tribe was. And so it was cool for me to get to do that as a Native person and get to share that history with a broader audience, and also get to share Native art that many people don't get exposed to, because we tend to sort of be relegated to the past. People don't realize that we still exist. And so a lot of the work that I do outside of my work as a curator, but just as an artist and creative in general, is to sort of remind people of our persistence on the land, of our resilience, and our sort of ongoing presence as placekeepers. And so This is Kalapuyan Land is very much turned into this thing that I could have never predicted. It went from, being a gallery exhibition to being turned into a yard sign exhibition, which has been shown both at OSU and UWO, and has also been shown in just like all these other random communities around the Portland metro area. And so it's really been awesome to see different communities engaging with these histories and showing interest in histories that aren't their own, and how that has really started to create more conversations around, getting to know the stewards of the land that you're on, and that This is Kalapuyan Land is like a broader conversation about people acquiring the knowledge about the people that, manage the land that you're living on. And many people don't know who that is. And so my goal is to encourage people to get to know those things. And this is one way that we can do that. So, getting to know the history of the land that you're on will likely include the Indigenous people that belong to it. So, and also, just so you know, a plug, even though it was closed down early, it closed because of the pandemic, we're actually reopening This is Kalapuyan Land with all new artworks at Pittock Mansion this February. I'm so excited, and it'll be up through July. So if you didn't get to see the exhibition in person when it was originally open, you'll be able to see it again at Pittock. And I'm just so excited to continue to share this history with everybody. So thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. Next up, Matthew Earl Williams is going to join us. If you could come on screen, Matthew. Matthew what do I say about Matthew? Matthew
We're off
is,
to a great start.
yeah, we are. Let me, I didn't write these things down. It's like I get to like introduce people who I think of as like community members, but also as friends. And Matthew has his MFA, does his day job is doing a lot of social media and video work for the tribal government. But the way that he thinks about his art in sort of these like really thoughtful, experiential, exploratory ways that I immediately recognized as holding like influenced by indigeneity and by identity. And I felt like I immediately associated it, even though the subject matters themselves, whether it be a project about four-leaf clovers or a bowling alley and striving for perfection, I felt like I saw things and teachings, and I still do see those things in Matthew's work, and that it's deep and thoughtful. And Matthew has helped work on this exhibit that's opening up this week. And so I asked Matthew, although Matthew could present about a lot of things, what he's been active in doing in Corvallis is this new show that's coming up. And so I would encourage you, though, to keep in touch with Matthew's work and see what he's doing, because it's always quite interesting. And with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you and have you introduce yourself a little bit more, and then the show that you have coming up.
Yeah, thank you, David. That was
Yeah.
great. So yeah, Matthew Williams. I recently got to put together a show at the Art Center there in Corvallis, and when the kind of opportunity arose, I was like, definitely want to involve some cool people that I know. So I talked to Anthony Hudson and Steph, and got them involved in the project as well, and had some good conversations. And then we brought on Amber as a fourth, just kind of other person to kind of get involved in the show. So we have three of the presenters here today that were part of putting that together, and we're excited for it. And that opens on Friday. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I'm going to show in there, just the kind of series that I did a couple of years back, just trying to figure out what to do during kind of like COVID times. And then hopefully we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about the show, but there's also a link to the show in the document that David shared earlier. So if you want to find out more about the availability of when you can come and visit and kind of the events that are going on, it'll be on that kind of website link. So what you're looking at on the screen is one of my newest works that I've made. The last couple projects were kind of me kind of thinking and kind of delving into this idea of what kind of modern native identity is. And I think a lot about what our kind of digital identities are, right? Like, what does that sort of look like on the internet, like how we present ourselves online, which is funny because now we're all meeting online right now. So hello, internet people, and all of your identities here. And so I started to kind of think about what that meant to be kind of like native in a modern society, a technological society, a digital society. Because a lot of times natives, they don't get maybe lumped into that same kind of area, right? We think of natives being connected to the physical world, the land, right? We have to have that connection to land and place, which I do think is important for everyone to have. But I wondered what that would look like in sort of like a digital space. And so a few years back, before even making this project, I started to explore these virtual kind of digital worlds, these kind of open world video game kind of experiences, where people from all over the world, they create these avatars and they go into these digital spaces, and there's rules, there's objectives, there's things to do in those digital spaces, but a lot of times people just explore and sort of, live out a digital life. And so I did a couple of different projects like this, and recently kind of combining that old mentality of being a photographer exploring the digital world, the digital space. There was this video game that was released called Red Dead Redemption 2, which is essentially a giant open world digital playground that's made to mimic and kind of be based off of old Western kind of cowboys and Indians. And I found through just kind of exploring those worlds and chatting with people that are online in this space, there are these kind of groups of people that choose to create these native characters and these kind of like native avatars, and they almost kind of create their own tribes within this own virtual space. And so I worked with them on kind of creating this kind of portrait series that you're looking at here. This is one of them where I would talk to them and I'd be like, what kind of, I'd tell them the project, what I'm doing, the past things I've done. And I was like, I want to take portraits of your kind of digital native characters. And I would ask them, where do they want to pose? What kind of like pose do they want to be doing? Things like that. And then what I would do is I would set up a view camera that is filled with a kind of 8x10 sheet of metal that has kind of light sensitive chemistry on it. And the reason why I did that is because that's similar to the kind of photography that would have been popular towards the end of kind of like the Western era. And I would then take a photograph of my screen after I manipulated the in-game camera to kind of compose. And so really just kind of the basics of it would be like, I'm trying to connect with these people and take a portrait of them like I would in the real world, but I'm doing that through my computer screen or television screen in this kind of like virtual world, and using this kind of old archival kind of process, this old kind of tintype process essentially. And so the reason why I wanted to do this was I was really curious, like documenting these people and why they choose to be kind of like natives and take on this like native identity. It's kind of like this idea of like cosplaying or role playing as a native character. And through my experience in meeting these people, none of them were native. A lot of their reasonings for wanting to do it is they were just kind of interested in portraying kind of like the underdog, right? Because in cowboys and Indian movies, the Indians never win. And that's like kind of where I think they got their inspiration for the poses that they did too. So like this one that you're looking at right now, specifically, like they were like, oh, like I want to be getting captured by like the sheriff and like going to be brought in, right? So like you can see there's kind of like a hand on the right hand side kind of holding a rifle pointed at like their native character. And that's like the way that they wanted to be portrayed in this like portrait. And it was kind of just really I don't want to say it was too like shocking, but it was sort of just kind of like interesting, I guess, to kind of like get into the mind of someone who decides to spend all this time like in this virtual space, and these people that are choosing to kind of role play as these characters. And there's something about me maybe trying to explore like native identity through that and what that looks like in a digital space. So that's kind of like the project that I have here that I'll be showing for the first time in person on the at that show. And yeah, so I made these during kind of like the 2020-2021. So it was another project, or kind of a project that I could also do during COVID. So it was kind of like me exploring ways to kind of photograph people also during the pandemic, and also thinking about just how people were connecting during the pandemic and what they were doing. So it's really hard to show digitally, so I hope that people can come to it and kind of see that they're like physically, like, they're metal pieces, they're one of a kind, they're kind of like these interesting kind of objects. So yeah, that's all I have on that project.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Do you want to give any more details about the show and the opening of the show this Friday?
Yeah, so Friday night, I think at 5:30 is the planned sort of artist talk. I believe the gallery will be open starting at 4 o'clock, but around 5:30, me and Anthony are going to be kind of just talking a little bit about the work more in depth. And so it'll be easier to kind of explain and talk about what people are actually in the space and can be able to see it. But we'll be doing kind of like a little presentation there, just talk about what people are seeing at that time. So we'll be there also to answer more questions if anything comes up from it, from this talk or whatnot. But yeah, we'll be there. I think it closes at 7 o'clock. So if you have some time from 4 o'clock to 7, please kind of show up at any time in between there and take a look at that work, as well as the kind of video that Anthony is talking about. And then, yeah, Steph also has work in that show as well that wasn't shown here tonight. And there's some group projects and things that we did together. We're really excited about it. And I don't know, we had fun making it. And thank you for the center for kind of giving us the space. I think that that's really important too. They definitely were just okay with everything we wanted to do, and we're very kind of on board with just kind of handing over the keys to us, I guess, for the next kind of like month or so. If you can't make it to Friday, there'll be a couple of other events that'll happen throughout. I know that there's like the Thursday art walks that are popular in Corvallis, so I'll definitely try to make it to those as well and just kind of hang out. And then they have their regular kind of gallery hours throughout the week. I believe it's like something like noon to 4 that they're open most days. I know that you posted the link as well, and I'll have more specifics there.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Could all of our speakers join us on screen? Great. So now I guess my hope is, we get to occasionally have conversation with each other, although it's been a while. But, with other people here, I wanted to kind of start conversation by asking a few questions. This is open, so, we don't need a particular order. If you feel inclined to answer the question or not, that's totally fine. Also, if you have questions for each other, please ask them away. So if something piques your interest, I'm hoping to just kind of open up some conversation before we go to general question and answer. My first question for all of you is, what's something that you've been inspired by or decided to pursue recently?
I just got done talking, so I thought I would let one of
I'll start because my deadline is fast approaching. Actually, I'm so inspired and moved by Indigenous queerness and by Two-Spirit people. And part of my project with the IPCA Fellowship, which I mentioned earlier, is researching Two-Spirit people and interviewing Two-Spirit artists. But it's so incredible to talk to so many different artists. I've been interviewing artists from within the region too, and from within our tribe, as well as people from Siletz. And it's so funny to me that, well, not funny, but it's kind of sad that we don't know a lot of our histories. We don't know a lot of our queer histories within, indigeneity. And it's really amazing kind of uncovering some of these stories and finding out about different doctors and healers and just incredible medicine people that lived Two-Spirit lives, to use a modern term for their identities. So I'm very inspired by that. And I don't know, I just think it proves that we're better. So I enjoy that very much. I'm also inspired by land acknowledgements, but that's because they're bad and I'm a horrible person. So that's me.
Good. I'll throw something in, which it's been really great. Jed Chirac, who was our first presenter, is a linguist that's been associated with our community for a long time, but became a full-time employee this last year. And having Jed around has been wonderful because we don't have living speakers of Kalapuya, right? Or Chinook. We have Chinook Wawa, the trade language, which we have a school, but there's just things that we don't necessarily know. And one of the more powerful things that in conversations with having a linguist around is that the word for fire and home in the Kalapuya language and in Chinook is the same word. So like in Chinook, so this idea of like fire and home, there aren't two different words. And so it's not in the same way that we think of fire and home. It's like this idea that it's like a place that you make, right? And there's like agency to it, and it has to do with like making a place. And those places where our ancestors burned are the places that we made, the same way that you like make a home, right? And I just like, that has really given me all this inspiration to be like, how could the same fire and home are like that important to each other? And that just has me super excited about all the prescribed firework and other things, and relates to previous talks. So yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm mostly inspired right now just by Indigenous futurism and science fiction type stuff. I've been working on my own Indigenous futurism story and just like trying to sort of figure out how I'm normally like a very straightforward tech writer and whatnot. So being a creative writer is something new to me. So, telling our stories through that medium has been interesting to explore, and using technology and futurism as a way to bring Indigenous identity into the present is something I'm interested in.
I have a really cheesy answer, and then I have another answer. The cheesy answer is like all of you that are here, which is like legitimately true, right? Like David, you're such like an advocate for, I think, like artists and the arts, and I really appreciate that. Right. Again, like the first kind of like phone calls I made, or emails or whatnot, messages out to people was, Anthony and Steph, when I got the idea, or got the opportunity to do a show, and like the work that you're making, like both of you, I think is like amazing, right? Like Anthony, the stuff that you're doing, the way that you mix like this sort of like funny and kind of like really kind of like serious things kind of like together works well. Steph, like you have like a drawing on a Star Wars book, like you got like natives in Star Wars, like that's so cool. So like I think like that's like just like you all inspire me a lot. And to go kind of further into that, it's for me, again, as David mentioned, like I do video work for the tribe, so I'm always interested, I think, in like video and kind of like paying attention to that. And I think just like modern native representation like in mainstream media has been like really cool recently. Like the Prey movie I think was cool. It's kind of like thinking about like ancestral, but then like Reservation Dogs being like this modern look, and like Rutherford Falls being like a modern look, and the way that they intertwine like these kind of like native experiences is like we're like really funny, but we have to be, because we've had to deal with so much like kind of like trauma throughout our lives experiences, and like ancestral kind of like experience, and that kind of trauma that's been kind of like passed down like intergenerationally. So I think that the way that they tackle those things has been really kind of exciting and refreshing for me to see.
Can I just say one thing building off of that? Everyone, you all, I tell you all to watch movies, but everyone needs to watch Slashback. It just went on streaming. It's Inuit girls versus basically The Thing. And I've always been saying like I need to see res girls fighting monsters, and they finally made that movie, and it's so great. I love it. So check it out. Like this is an amazing time for actually seeing us on screen, because it never happened before unless you were played by a Swedish man.
Yeah, what a different world. That's for sure. That was your cheesy one, Matthew. What was your
Oh, well, I folded it into each other.
Okay,
So
you
the
folded
cheesy
it.
one was all of you, and then I folded it into, it's a nice little segue. It transitioned into like mainstream media.
Okay,
So
cool.
it was so seamless. I'm sorry.
You owned it. Okay. So the other part is we are going to have a question and answer after this. I see some people adding questions in the chat. Please feel free to keep adding those. We have just a couple more questions to ask our presenters before we open it up generally, but feel free to add those questions now. My next question is, what are ways that communities can be welcoming to Indigenous artists? And by contrast, you could take that of when is a time where you have felt welcomed by a community as a Native artist?
Yeah, I was gonna say that that can be hard. There's not necessarily, I think, a like a right answer for every situation, but for me, like uh just like recognizing that Indigenous artists in particular sort of have specific boundaries that we have to overcome to even be working artists that many other artists are not battling against, from stereotypes that are expected for us to produce in our work, to us literally being stereotypes when we present ourselves in our work. So letting Indigenous artists be Indigenous artists, and however that appears is really important, because I'm sure that both Matthew and Anthony can speak to this, but I have felt pressure to make work that looks Indian, and all the work that I make is Indian because I'm Indian. And so it doesn't matter what it looks like or what you think it should look like. And so those kinds of sort of very unconscious biases of visuality are imposed on us quite often. And so thinking about that when you're interacting with Indigenous artists is important, because we all have our unique perspectives that don't always align to what you perceive Native artists to produce necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like just giving us opportunities, and not necessarily ones that have to have even like an Indigenous title on it, right? Like just like giving us chances and opportunities in other spaces and places. I think that that's really important. Yeah, that's kind of like the biggest thing. I think that like people that are here and attending stuff like this are usually going to be like people that are interested. And so like I think like you're onto a good start of being like a good kind of community member, because you're learning. And so I think that's good. Just listening, learning, yeah, growing from that all experiences from other cultures. So thank you all for being here. I think that's a good start.
It's funny because I'm trying to think of when I have felt welcome. And I think a tricky thing with that is, yeah, there's so much fetishization and tokenization that happens. I think we've all experienced this, and I think there's like this expectation, one, like Steph spoke to, this expectation of what Native art looks like and blah, blah, blah. But also there's an expectation, like we come in November, we always get calls in November, and we kind of look at the calendar where this is December, luckily. But we always get calls in November to do stuff, or we'll get asked to do land acknowledgements. And it's like, why would I welcome you into my own house? So I think, you know, a big part of a way to be welcome is feed us and house us. I honestly, like, I think if you have a program, if you have a department, if you have a residency, like you have to open that to that space and that time to people that are from that land. So thinking of an opportunity that I went through that was really wonderful was actually Steph connected me to the Carolyn Moore Writers House residency that's run out of PCC. It's on Kalapuya lands. And I got to go stay there for a month this last year and to work on my book, work on a play, work on several other things. And they literally just messaged and they said, you don't have to apply. We just want to put a Kalapuya person in this house on Kalapuya land. And I said, that's fantastic. And it was incredible. There was zero expectation. I didn't have to come in and like smudge the place for everybody and like put on a show. There was none of that. It was literally just, here, we are going to support you. And that was it. So I'm like, if you have the means, if you have the land, if you have funding, like honestly, it's your responsibility to make it happen for Native people that are actually from that place. So that's one way to make us feel welcome. It's actually welcome us and support us.
You guys kind of bridged my two questions together. So I think, do you have any questions for each other? You're thinking about doing something. You're going to try to punk Anthony, aren't you, Steph? I can see it.
No way. I'm not trying to do that in front of all these people.
Well, I've also learned, like, don't mess with the drag clown. The drag clown will get you every time.
Never.
Undefeated, always wins.
Yes. Well, wonderful. Bonnie, can we turn it back over to you to moderate question and answer?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Thanks for having me. We've got a lot of great questions. So I'll start. I think this might be for you, David. Will the bridge, there's two questions about the bridge. Will the bridge have something explaining the plants shown and their place in Kalapuya culture?
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm clearly sick and the powers of Zoom still allow this to go on. So I'm excited for that. It's not decided yet. You know, there may be opportunities for interpretation. I'm kind of inclined to not push for that. I like it just being baked in. And I think that developing some sort of support, like if the recommendation came from me and the tribe, it would be to not have a lot of words about it, but to have some sort of like accompanying document that if there's organizations that want information about it, it could be distributed. But I like that it's just baked into the infrastructure in the hope that people would kind of ask questions and try to learn. I think that you can really overkill things when you put words all over everything. Like it has beauty in and of itself, and it should just be able to like exist that way. So that's sort of where I feel, but it's not up to me. And there's scoping committees and all types of things, right? So we're very early on in those processes, and there continually will be public scoping meetings and other things. And I imagine that everyone wants to do signage of some point. It just, there's a lot of limitations, right, up on the bridge itself to do signage. So just from other projects that I've been a part of, I would anticipate that if there was going to be signage, it would probably be not on the bridge itself, but adjacent or near that area.
Sure, thanks. Will the art on the bridge bring any capital to the Indigenous communities as well?
Yeah, one of the really cool parts about this, I'll tee up Steph for it. Steph was commissioned to do a design for the side of the bridge. Can you talk about that at all, Steph, or is that kind of?
I mean, well, it's a government project, so it takes a really long time. But yes, I have done preliminary sketches to sort of propose some design ideas for what will be known as the Van Buren Bridge. They're basically replacing it. So the new Van Buren Bridge will have what probably be either traditional plants or native. I think I did an illustration of a beaver for some of the I don't know what they're called, the columns that hold up the bridge. So yeah, they're still kind of in the debating process and all of that, and decisions through the government take forever. So we're still in the preliminary design phase of it, but it's going to be a beautiful bridge. It's going to be really cool.
And Steph was paid for that design work, that preliminary design work.
Yes.
So yes, there is the ability, and it's already happened, where Native artists are being paid to contribute the conceptual ideas. It just matters on what gets chosen or selected. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And this is a question from Matthew from Julia. She's really interested in your project. In terms of non-natives portraying native characters in the digital space, did you just accept how they wanted to be portrayed? Also, were you able to choose camera angle, etc., and choosing how to photograph the avatars?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the camera angle and things like that, I had to manipulate the kind of in-game camera. So I do compose it similar to how I would in the real world, but there's some limitations and also some weird benefits that happen in like a video game space. And so what I can do is I can move the camera, like I move my character, because I have to have a character to be in that space, right? So I have to be a photographer in the virtual space as well. And I have to move my character like kind of like next to like an object to be able to kind of move the camera to where I don't see my character anymore. I only see their character. And so I have to like go like into walls or into like a horse or into something like really weird to be able to like not see it anymore, because there's kind of like a weird space. It's not like necessarily a glitch, but I can choose camera angles and I can compose, but there is some sort of limitations to what I can do. But the benefits are like I can be inside a wall, right? Like I can't do that in the real world. So there are some things that maybe can help sometimes with that, but then also can hurt because I am limited to what the kind of in-game tools are. And in terms of the people just kind of letting them be, pretty much, yeah. I didn't explain the kind of idea of like, like questioning, I guess, too much about what they did, or like, telling them that what they were doing was wrong necessarily, because it was much more about this kind of exploitation of like what, like I kind of wanted to get to know these people a little bit, like where were they from, what they were doing, and why they wanted to do this, but I didn't want to come off so aggressive that they, felt like they were like I was insulting them, and I'm kind of like using them for a photograph too, right? Because there's already kind of like a weird power dynamic or relationship there. So I didn't try to confront them, I guess, too much in kind of like letting them just role play out these kind of like native characters. But I did ask a lot of questions in our meetings that were just sort of, a lot of inquisitive why did you choose that hat? Like, what did you want to do with this? You know, like, why did you choose this specific thing? And a lot of it were people, you know, they were inspired by a movie that they saw, or like a Western, or I wanted to be native from like this specific area where I live now, even though I'm not native. So it was like this weird thing of like, they thought they were like honoring like the people of the area that they were living in, right? Which is like sort of goes back to the argument of like sports mascots, like, no, we're honoring you. And it's like, no, you're not. Like, it's just weird. Like, it's not like, I don't feel any like greatness from that. Right. So it was sort of like that same kind of argument or that same kind of conversation. I hope that answered that.
Oh yeah, I think it did. Can I throw another question at you, Matthew? And someone else asked, they say your digital images seem to be mostly men. Were there many women who invented Indigenous avatars?
It's a good question. I didn't ask like gender specifically from the people that I was like playing with. There were people that like made female identifying like native characters within the game. And so there's a couple of those in the series that are kind of female there, but I didn't like specifically ask those questions. I would imagine if we all were to kind of like assume mostly male, because that's mostly the demographic for video games, you know, predominantly. But I also think that's sort of like an old kind of like way to look at things. I think that everyone's kind of a gamer, right? Like my grandma plays like this game called Tribes on Facebook like all night. And like she just collects coins and stuff like that. I don't know like what she does with it, but she's obsessed with it. And like she's a gamer. So I think we're all gamers now. But yeah, I would imagine that most people that I interacted with in that game were probably people who identify as male.
Thanks. And then I know that we've shared this in the chat and we've mentioned it many times, but it came up as a question so many times. So let's say it one more time. When is the exhibit, the art talk, and where is it on Friday? Will someone just repeat that information?
Yeah, so I believe on Friday opening is from 4 to 7 and the artist talk will start at 5:30.
Thank you. And that is at the Art Center in Corvallis, everybody. Link in the chat.
Thank you.
There are two questions that came up around land acknowledgements. I think people became really curious about them, Anthony, because you mentioned them. So I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but others could chime in too. Someone was curious, like, what makes land acknowledgements bad? They're very open to your perspective and curious about it. And then someone else asked, what is a land acknowledgement? They're not sure they understand what that is. So maybe we could clear that up.
Let me enlighten you. For those that don't know, a land acknowledgement is what happens when you go to the theater to like a presentation and then an administrator walks out on stage and says, hello, we at the Old Spaghetti Factory would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional lands of the Kalapuya. Thank you. And now let's begin the play. And it's a practice that kind of caught hold in, I think, Australia and Canada first, and then came to the United States. We usually took hold in the arts first, because the arts always do things first, gentrify, you know, land acknowledgements, everything. The whole practice is to point out that you are on somebody's stolen land, that you have in fact stolen land, you are a thief. But beyond that, I don't know what it actually does, except because oftentimes my read with why they are bad, because I don't think they're intrinsically bad. I think it's good to seek out this information, as Steph's project has proven. Like, why else would those signs be so popular? Except it's proving that it is important and people want to know whose land they're on. But well, besides also honoring this reality of this history. So my issue with why they're bad is that oftentimes it feels like an act of absolving. There is an act of absolving in the process, and they are empty. They're often past tense. They say the wise, proud stewards of the land who were here, who traditionally were here. It's always past tense. Oftentimes they also aren't researched correctly. A lot of the times in Portland, one of Carla's, I mean, I've been doing land acknowledgements in my work for the last 3 years. And it shows up in every single piece I've done for the last 3 years. But I collected land acknowledgements from Portland nonprofits, and they're all the same. They literally just copy and paste, and they begin to get reductive. There were so many tribes and bands here that they made it very simplified. And then And then they got ahistorical, and then I see land acknowledgements in email sign-offs. I saw one on Grindr. I saw one in a well-to-do white woman's I bought a house post, doing a land acknowledgement. And I'm like, okay, but what is the action? What does this actually do? How does this benefit anybody except you looking like you went to nativelands.ca and you were able to report back, oh, well, I found out I'm on this stolen land. So I think a land acknowledgement is great if you actually don't copy and paste, if you don't go to nativelands.ca, if you actually reach out to your local tribal community, you establish a relationship, and then you learn what is an actionable item. How can I actually help the tribe? What do they need? What can I assist? What can I bring awareness to? I think that's a very important step, because otherwise I think it's literally just an empty gesture. And I think it's just a means for white people to feel better about ignoring the elephant in the room. As Carla says in her land acknowledgement, now that we've acknowledged the elephant in the room, we can go back to ignoring it. So that's my, sorry.
Very good. As an administrator type, and the type that receives a lot of these inquiries, who also knows the history and can, point things out of what's accurate. And the challenge that I run into is it's sort of the burden of doing emotional work for other people, and expecting the tribe, who has a lot of other things to do with our time. So when I have an inbox that weekly, I have a dozen inquiries from somebody that wants me to review their land acknowledgement or wants this or that. It's like, there's also only so much relationship and time that can happen. And, oftentimes the people asking are the type of people that won't take no or no response for an answer, because I might not be able to get to it. Right. And so then they start answer shopping, and they have to get an answer. And a lot of tribal governments are even bogged down with this, as there's people that are wanting information, but they're pursuing it, they're placing the burden on tribes or tribal people, as opposed to trying to minimize that burden as much as possible by doing the bulk of work sort of themselves. And then the challenge is that it's good, right? We want to be in relationship, and it's good for that. But just because we want to doesn't mean that we can be in all the relationships that we would like to be in, right? We all have a finite amount of time. And so that's something that I run into just all the time. 2/3 of the population of Oregon lives in the homelands of the Grand Round people, right? I can't review every single organization's land acknowledgement. Right. And when I'm doing it, it's emotionally exhausting to be the person who's having to explain to people, actually, these lands were ceded. This is what ceded lands means. And this is what this means. And this is what that means. And so I'm just really waiting for a nonprofit to come along to do all this educational work, because it seems like there's enough of a mission or a vision to that. But that's the administrator type, and my role as the cultural resource manager. And I think we've all had hours-long conversations with each other about this over the last few years.
It's my fault. I bring it up every time.
Well, no, there's always a new tilt on it. There's always something new or trending, or it's curious.
I will say there is a trend right now of educators reaching out to me, asking what goes after the land acknowledgement. And so I have been doing presentations for educators specifically in Oregon about, okay, what does it mean to, do a land acknowledgement? Who is that for? But what are you going to do afterwards? And talking about the idea of a land commitment, and what does that mean? Each person can make different commitments, but each of us can commit to learning. And so, that I think is what people are missing, is what comes after the acknowledgement. It's kind of like when you say sorry to someone, well, what comes after that? And that's a change in behavior. That's, making amends, those types of things. And so I think we're all just waiting for what comes next.
Thank you. No, I think that's really helpful. It really answers the question. Thank you all. I was hesitant to ask this because it didn't necessarily get mentioned in the event tonight, but I think it might be interesting. And it's directed at Steph. So David says, I admired Steph's recent Instagram comments about AI art filters and how they relate or don't relate to identity. What are folks' sense of AI and Indigenous art and identity?
I'll just kind of repeat what I said today on my post, which was a lot of my friends who are artists, image makers like myself are freaked out by this AI technology. And as someone who also is a tech writer who works in the technology fields, I know a lot about AI algorithms and how they're used and who is making them and what biases they have and what biases they reproduce. And so a lot of the conversations that we had today were around, one, the ethics of, using real artists' work to produce these AI models that these artists are not consenting to, so they're having their work stolen. And then these companies are taking this work to train these algorithms and then charge people to use them. So they're basically using real artists to make money, but not giving any credit to the artists that they've ripped off. And then on top of it, they're using the images that we upload in other ways. And, and then on top of that, that the AI is whitewashing, is fat phobic, is also misogynistic. And so there's all kinds of problems within AI, and its biases that it's reproducing are definitely rooted in white supremacy. And so I have concerns about it from that perspective, as well as just as an artist. I don't think it's going to put us out of business, but it definitely does freak artists out generally in that regard.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go for it, Anthony.
I was gonna just a quick side thing that everyone calls it AI art, and I'm like, it's not art. Art is art is made by living things. AI is not alive yet, although all these people are doing their damnedest to bring it to life with training it. So that's all.
Yeah, I think, one of these things that I think is really important, and it has to do with like empowerment and the perspective of Native people, is this idea that like we need to indigenize technology so that technology doesn't take us over, and it's a part of that translation work. So, the key terms document that I sent has a reference to like traditional as opposed to ancestral. And so I want to talk about that just for a second to say that like, yeah, there's a way that our ancestors did things, right? That's ancestral. But traditional can still be cultural, and it just changes over time. It's a change in materials, it's other things. And this isn't like a foreign idea. Like Europeans have done it just as much as anything else, right? Like, how did first foods from the Americas become associated as cultural foods of other places in like less than 500 years, right? Potatoes are from the Americas, but yet potatoes are associated as an important food in Irish culture, or tomatoes, which is the same, and tomato sauce being an important thing for Italians. So the real question about this is that as Indigenous people, how do we indigenize things that are actually a part of, that are shared? They don't have to be ancestral for us to make them Indigenous. And I think that like, how is that done authentically, like really interests me. And it kind of relates to this question that we have in the chat about modern art or contemporary art. And to me, I think that authentically, there's room for it when we pursue these ideas of indigenizing art forms. We currently have a show up by a tribal member artist who was an abstract artist and a painter at Chichalu, Frank Cohen, the exhibit Howl, right? These are things that people wouldn't typically think of as native art. It wouldn't be branded that way, but it's a native person. And yet the themes and the like influences and everything else is inherently indigenous, right? Like I see that in the work. And so I think that that's just what I wanted to leave, is like this terminology and allow for change. But that's where empowerment comes from, is when Native people actually get to indigenize things that weren't ancestral. And that is where like empowerment is coming from, and I think is a place where we need to be going. So maybe we can get Steph to work with a team of developers to write an algorithm that actually does justice to
Oh no.
No.
I've spent enough time with engineers. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, another project then.
Great, thanks, y'all. And how do Native elders respond to your modern art forms?
My grandma says, "That's nice, Matthew."
I think it depends on the elder. I was like thinking about one of our elders, Tracy, who is like a big fan of all of our work, and she just loves everything that we do, and she's always sending me supportive messages, and it's like people like that make what I do mean so much more. But then there's, there is conservative people within every community, and certainly there are even my parents don't get my art, but that's okay because my community does generally. So that's all the validation I need.
I actually think elders respond to my work almost better than other people. And maybe that's because I grew up sort of generationally removed. My parents were much older than most parents when they had me. And so I was kind of raised by my grandmothers. So like if you go to my shows, most of the writing, I'm referencing stuff from like generations. I'm referencing the Sonny and Cher show. I'm referencing the Shirtwaist Factory Fire. I'm referencing the Lusitania. So elders actually really connect with my work and really support it. My grandma would always ask me, anytime she saw me, she would ask me as an adult, she would ask me if I was still putting on plays. And she was such a big fan, and she couldn't come to my shows because she lived in tribal housing in Grand Round, and like she didn't drive at night or anything. And so we would record stuff and then we would show her. My parents would take it back and show her on the TV. And she was really wonderful and sweet about that. So if she had any issues, she didn't make it known. She always was just very proud. So yeah, elders are great.
Awesome, thanks. This is a great question. As artists, do any of the panelists have other Indigenous artists that you'd recommend audience members learn more about?
There's so many.
So many.
Yeah.
I was gonna
There's-
say Natalie Ball right off the top of my head, like one of the most popular contemporary Indigenous artists right now. So definitely check her out.
The Hallie Ford has a show right now in Salem that's open called Transformations, which is a really exceptional Salish form line show. But as a part of that, they realized that the show wasn't going to have local Native art. And the curator, Rebecca Dobkins, did a really great job of approaching Bobby Mercier to actually carve a welcome figure for the museum that's going to permanently stay there. And it's a great way of seeing placekeeping, of commissioning a local artist to do sort of local based carving for this really exceptional art museum that we have here in the state of Oregon. So that show, I don't know if it's up much longer. I would definitely go try to see it as soon as you can. But the welcome figure will be at the entrance of the Hallie Ford Museum from this point moving forward. So Bobby Mercier, and then that welcome figure at the Hallie Ford Museum.
Yeah, the Portland Art Museum is having a great explosion of amazing Native art and supporting it. A lot of thanks to Kathleen Ash Milby, the Native art curator. Right now there's a show celebrating the work of Oscar Howe, who did a lot of illustration and painting half a century ago. And then there's a new exhibition from Jeffrey Gibson, who's Afro-Indigenous, and it's awesome. I was able to be part of the photo shoots for that piece. And I mean, locally, I love Sarah Seastream is incredible. Sherrod Yonker, Greg Robinson, who I get to share this fellowship with. There's a million people that are incredible and amazing. And on a national level, if anybody likes the kind of stuff I do, I mean, look at Kent Monkman. He's such an inspiration of mine. Does drag as Miss Chief Eagle Testicle, and also does amazing paintings that get into the Met and the MoMA. There's lots of amazing Native artists out there.
Yeah, I'll pull from just photo, video expertise. Wendy Red Star is a great kind of performance photo. Stephen Paul Judd is making really cool stuff. A lot of kind of appropriation and kind of taking things and kind of turning it on its side. So those are kind of just bigger national ones to start with.
Amazing. That's great. Well, I mean, it is almost 8:30. We do have some other great questions, but I don't want us to go too long. Thank you all so much for your time. This was truly wonderful. And we got a lot of comments that I didn't share just about what a thoughtful, intelligent, enlightening, interesting conversation this was. So everyone's very appreciative of your time tonight and sharing your amazing work with us. So I hope we get a lot of people at the show on Friday. Great. All right. Well, with that being said, I guess I will sign us off. Okay. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
Have a
everybody.
lovely evening. Thanks for joining us.